Vogue is really powerful. It's such a powerful brand.
Vogue is a portal for expression.
It isn't just a fashion magazine.
Without creativity and innovation and originality, how can we exist?
There's a prestige of being part of Vogue.
If Vogue is behind something, people who are interested in the industry are listening.
If something is featured in Vogue, it kind of immediately gets that stamp of like, this is approved.
There's also just a modernity and ease to Australian Vogue covers that I don't think other publications really nail in the same way.
For Australian women to be given people that they can go, I can do that, or I can be like that, it makes the world available.
Vogue Australia has a very rich history, being 60 years, and so for us this is an opportunity to tell our unique story. The 60th anniversary is your diamond anniversary, so we decided we would try to find the most incredible diamond we could, and we had to shoot somebody who we could really hold up and call an Australian diamond. The foundations of Vogue Australia started with a young Jewish boy escaping Nazi Germany.
Dad had fled Germany a few months before the gates of hell shut, and Dad had been quite traumatised in Nazi Germany as a young German Jewish boy. He and my grandfather made their way to Auckland, and I think he began to reinvent himself totally from that point on. And that fed his ambitions for the rest of his life. He was headhunted in 1958 by the owners of Vogue magazine, but he knew nothing about publishing. His background was in marketing, and it was in textiles, and it was in shoes. But he had some core self-belief that he could introduce into Australia, into this country that had welcomed him a magazine of ultra high quality that hadn't been seen before.
We'd been through the Second World War. We'd had rationing and coupons for fabrics and clothes, and suddenly things were getting better and everyone got very excited about it.
The year 1959 in Australia. Our nation comprised 10 million people. Television was in its infancy. Hollywood did come to Australia that year. Ava Gardner and Gregory Peck starred in a science fiction movie, and Ava Gardner said, "On the Beach is a story about the end of the world, and Melbourne sure is the right place to film it."
A journalist came out from US Vogue to actually report on what Australia was like, and she headlined her report back, "Australia, a man's country, for better or for worse." It was very much the white Australia policy era. It was a very different Australia to the Australia we find ourselves living in today.
Australia was a desert in the 50s, which is when I grew up, and it was very hard to find young people that were creative like I was.
The late 50s was barren culturally. A lot of Australian artists and writers had left Australia.
And knowing that all that excitement was happening in London, I just wanted to go to London. And I arrived there in 1965, 18 years old, which was when I actually came alive.
I was shocked when I was told that Australian Vogue was the fourth oldest Vogue in the world, and that it actually came to Australia in 1959. Because my mother is French, and she came to Australia in 1961. When she came, she thought everybody was wearing tabliers. Tabliers are like smocks, and she certainly did not remember Australia as a fashion capital.
There was nothing to recommend Australia in terms of its receptivity to an Australian Vogue. It was a very quixotic, crazy brave thing to do.
Vogue Australia was built off the wealth of those Australian women who were buying Christian Dior and spending up big on Parisian fashion, and then in 1959 convinced Condé Nast that we deserved our own Vogue, that we were ready for our own Vogue.
To see suddenly a beautiful magazine come out, a lovely glossy magazine with beautiful photographs and high fashion, I think everyone was interested, and certainly all the girls were. You know, it was exciting.
He believed that Australia could be, and was actually, more sophisticated than a lot of people thought. I think Dad was the best schmoozer in the country. He needed to convince advertisers to move their advertising dollar away from the established magazines towards this fledgling fashion magazine called Vogue.
Vogue, and especially in Australia, has a specific role within the entire world of press. It conveys the notion of refinement, elegance, but also it has a special role in terms of exploration.
When I discovered that the 60th was a diamond anniversary, I wanted to look back to see who our first international luxury jeweller was, who still partners with us today, and it turned out to be Cartier.
I think Cartier has a very different philosophy in terms of creation. The beginning of the 20th century, when Louis Cartier joined his father and the company, his vision and his ambition was to create a specific style for all creative expression at Cartier. And since then, we never stop cultivating, I think, this principle, which makes any Cartier piece recognizable as a Cartier piece.
We are a fashion magazine, we are Vogue. What we show on our covers is incredibly important. If I'm going to put something on the cover and say this is what we're going to celebrate 60 years with, then I want to go and see where they're from too.
Donc je suis heureux de vous présenter ce collier qui est composé donc d'une rivière de diamants poires avec deux exceptionnels diamants de 26,35 carats et 26,37 carats. Ces diamants sont démontables du collier pour les attacher sur une boucle d'oreille.
Now that's a diamond birthday. Wow.
The inspiration comes from the stones. This piece is incredible because of a collection of diamonds. It goes to pure shapes, pure lines. The elegance of a high jewelry piece is linked to the comfort and to the way it looks on your body. And this is why it requires so many hours.
Quand on attaque une pièce comme celle-ci, c'est 2000 heures de travail avant d'arriver au résultat final.
To do a couture story, it feels right for this. I think there are lots of great things. There's lots of great colour, there's a new designer at Schiaparelli, the Chanel collection is gorgeous. Hi Ricky, I'm good. It's just a matter of dates now. So I think if we can confirm, I think it's the 12th or 17th in New York. If Inez and Vanud can shoot the entire story in black and white and deliver a cover that's colourful and vibrant and has nice energy, they'll be thrilled. So I think we just need to make that date work.
Before the internet, the only connection you had with fashion was through magazines. They were the way that you were connected to the rest of the world.
I remember beautiful Australian models who I just thought were exquisite, and that was inspiring to me. I gleaned so much from Vogue, from magazines in general.
I think the Vogue brand just evokes such glamour, especially when you feel as an Australian you come from such a country that's so far, far away.
The 60s, which led to the early 70s and the election of Gough Whitlam, was a time of great ferment in Australia. And Dad was aware of a change in the zeitgeist.
And 1965 onward was when women decided they wanted to do big things. I think it was the fact that they could arrange when they had their babies because of the pill. It was a very important period, and it was very mind-stretching for me too, because I was living that life. I wanted to have a career, and they did too, and I was there dressing them so they could achieve their dreams.
You know, they weren't frightened to do something. They weren't frightened to say something or to wear something. There was a confidence that they had that this is me, and I'm going to show the world who I am and what I want to be.
The country was no longer this hidebound British outpost, that it was a place of culture and art and sophistication. And the success of Australian Vogue was one of the signs that Australia was emerging as a different kind of country.
We came back to Australia at the end of 1972. Whitlam had got in. The energy, it was the beginning of creativity in this country.
I was 22 when I arrived. My husband and I were going to come here, have a look around Australia, visit his family, and then go back to America. 45 years later, I'm still here.
I could have met her in London, but we were not destined to meet over there. We had to meet here in Sydney.
There was a spark, and that spark sort of has never really left. And I was just about to open the shop, Flamingo Park. There was a sign on the door called Step into Paradise, and that's what we did.
I was walking down the street one day with my husband, and on the newsstand there was a Vogue. And I said to my husband, but that's not right, because I have the latest Vogue. He said, there's an Australian Vogue. And I said, oh, come on, there can't be. And he said, yes. So I got my resume together and just waltzed into the Vogue office. I went in and met Bernie and then met Eve, and I was hired.
We really started to appreciate what women had to offer. Bernie Laser, by the 1980s, was running a staff of 95, of which 94 were women. So you could say that Vogue Australia was somewhat of a revolutionary workplace at the time.
It was a place of great collegiality. There would be fashion editors and beauty editors and advertising executives coming in and out of the office. So there was a buzz, like in any kind of newsroom.
I think there's a special place in the global Vogue family for Australian Vogue. It was an innovator. It started out very early. There's a lot of affection, I think, for how adventurous it was.
Vogue really encouraged us to be really different. I really treasure that we were able to be as creative as we wanted to be, and they supported it and showed that in their pages.
I think that Linda Jackson and Jenny Key are absolutely the people that in the late 70s, early 80s made me aware that it was possible to be genuinely creative in your own space and in your own cultural milieu. Singularly, the fact that Lady Di bought one of their sweaters when she came to Sydney and wore it internationally. I just realised it was possible to be Australian and to be true to your roots, but also be able to plant a flag on the international stage.
The ethos of Vogue has certainly been my natural ethos all my life. From the day I could almost walk, I had to travel. I had to see what was around the next corner. But at the same time, I always knew that we have something so unique to offer. And I think Vogue's ethos is the same thing.
In 1989, I was made editor of the magazine. I wanted it to be so much a part of everybody's life.
I remember my first cover. I felt like I'd finally been accepted to some extent in the fashion industry, because it is such a sort of iconic pinnacle in the world of fashion. It was the first time I'd been photographed in a way that wasn't so commercial. The images were very kind of strong body, strong shapes, beautiful background. These pictures are some of the best pictures I've ever done.
Our features editor at that moment, Carolyn Baum, came to me with the idea, why don't we ask Baz and CM to guest edit an issue? And I said, wonderful, let's get them in.
Editing Vogue Australia was one of the great experiences that Baz and I have had. We have been obsessed with magazines all our lives.
When I was very young, we lived in a very, very isolated place. But because we were the gas station and the farm, we got magazines. And one of them would have been Vogue.
So they came in to the office and sat in my office, and we were chatting about how fabulous it would be if they could do it.
And she said, look, Paris Vogue does this amazing thing. Every year, they have these great guest editors. And I'm thinking like, oh, who could they be? Have I ever heard of them? And she said, yeah, people like the Dalai Lama or Martin Scorsese. And we'd like you guys to be the first guest editors of Australian Vogue. And honestly, we just went like, how good would that be?
But Baz, there's one problem. I said, we don't have any money. We have like $40,000 to do a whole issue, which is not a lot of money. One model now gets paid $40,000 for the day. And so he looked at me and he said, no problem. We'll do it. We'll make it work.
To be part of making a magazine was just a great adventure because it was like a fan getting to be part of the storytelling that is magazines. And we loved it, and we loved getting to travel, to talk about Australia and Australian icons in a global context.
It meant that we could pursue creative ideas and say, okay, well, how can we celebrate the fashion of Australia? You know, oh, I know, let's ring up Australians we've never met, like Nicole Kidman.
And they asked me and they asked Kylie to come and play with them. I was so excited because they'd done Strictly Ballroom, which was, you know, so cool. And suddenly they were asking me to come and do the Australian issue of Vogue.
There was no digital, so everything was shot in studio. We had to build sets. We did everything, you know. You'd be doing the catering sometimes as well as building the set. I loved that spirit of Vogue in the early days. It was mad.
One of the things about it, we had to be on the cover, but we wanted Nicole on the cover, and we talked to Nancy. We had this idea that maybe Nicole should be really big and we should be like puppeteering her. In those days, because it was analog, we bothered to get the picture, blow it up to that size, get a ladder. No Photoshop involved in this issue at all. 100% authentic.
It was like a bubble that we were in, a Baz Luhrmann CM bubble. If you look back at those pictures, they're so iconic. It was just crazy.
That actual shoot was sort of the very, very, very basic beginnings of Moulin Rouge. I can see it when I look at the shoot and the way in which he directed me and found me and placed me in these photos and the way CM dressed me and morphed me into these different characters, really.
That experience told us a lot about the difference between, say, fashion and film, where you have to tell the story through one image. A great fashion designer needs to tell a narrative through clothes. So it's kind of something that's just always been very natural to us. Plus, we like to dress up.
Australia has evolved in photography and fashion and art and music and literature, and what I love about Vogue, particularly the Australian Vogue, is it touches on all the arts, and that's what sets Vogue Australia aside. As far as I'm concerned, as a reader, that's what I look for.
We're absolutely committed to the arts. The Australian ballet story of dancers on the beach was so beautifully captured in that natural environment. Vogue Australia and Kate Blanchett have a wonderful history together. Kate allowed us to document her final production as resident co-artistic director at the Sydney Theatre Company. That shoot produced breathtaking imagery for our pages, and then of course she was illustrated by David Downton for our 50th. We've been lucky that women have been willing to tell their stories in our pages, to talk about the things that matter to them. This was definitely the case with our story with Nicole in a magical setting in one of the most iconic locations in Australia.
I just remember when Vogue Australia asked me to come and shoot a cover, and you were like, we want to shoot it at Uluru. And I went, oh. We had just lost my father, and the idea of my mother and my daughters and me going to that place, it just seemed to come like a gift from the heavens. It was just incredibly profound. It's also deeply spiritual. I think you leave the place changed. And I have all these photos now that forever will be probably some of my favorite taken of me and my children. I didn't know it was top secret. I told everybody. This is different to Uluru. This is New York City and couture.
Does Nicole Kidman need to do covers in Australia? Everybody knows who Nicole Kidman is. She really has been willing to collaborate with us on the creative process. She is the true sort of diamond in terms of an Australian woman, and she was the right person to celebrate our cover.
I'm so glad that we've got Nicole for this cover. She has this huge respect for photography and everyone who's involved in making the picture. She really understands that it's a real collaborative effort. I just don't think there's a better person to help us celebrate this anniversary issue.
Nicole Kidman brings something extraordinary to a piece. Her beauty is very much in line with what we imagined when we created this piece. She will be the first lady ever to wear this necklace. It will give a specific personality to the piece forever.
La haute joaillerie, c'est quelque chose qui passe les générations. Nicole Kidman aussi, c'est une personne intemporelle qui séduit toutes les générations. Donc je pense que cela va très bien lui aller.
It took me quite a while to realize just how powerful and influential Vogue is as a brand, especially when it comes to two topics. One is the relationship between women and men, and the other one is the role of the textile industry and fashion in climate change. And it was time to bring our editors together, and so Anna Wintour and I one morning said it's really time to gather them all and started having these regular conversations, which have proven to be extremely inspiring and fruitful and challenging.
I think fashion magazines can and have for a long time done more harm than they have done good for the way that women feel about themselves. I think a lot of that has to do with the lack of representation that we see within fashion magazines. There's only one kind of cisgendered, straight, white, extremely thin woman that we see depicted a lot, and that's really not making people feel included in our conception of what beauty is.
I didn't see a lot of, black girls. I never really thought that I was gonna get anywhere with it because I just didn't see a lot of, dark-skinned women.
You would see in a lot of models on covers of magazine, they all looked very similar, had a similar look about it. When my cover came out, it showed that the fashion industry was changing, that they were accepting more diverse people and they were acknowledging the Aboriginal culture as well, which for many years they never did. For an Australian fashion magazine to believe in you, it's pretty special. Because of them, my career has gone on to do so many different things. I've had the opportunity to now be a mentor for my culture, and they believed in me when most people probably wouldn't have.
Everyone needs to be accepted for who they are and feel welcomed and wanted. The December issue was by far my favorite cover and story I've ever done because it's so personal to me. It included my family, and this was the first time I got to show the world where I come from, my background, just me, the real adult, and that's a cover that I will cherish for the rest of my life.
How's it amazing? We are here right now. We're not in Australia, but it feels like 1960s in Australia. Right now we're shooting with some legends, makeup by some icons, and it's just me.
I love the relationship that I have with everyone at Vogue. Here we are today in Paris, shooting for this very exciting issue, and I'm so honored that I get to be a part of it.
Vogue has such a strong history of storytelling. The pictures are inspired by South African photographer Malik Sidibe, who shot really gorgeous portraits and a lot of dance pictures in clubs of youth in the 60s. We had incredible music from the 60s. We had a dance choreographer who specialised in the 60s. Adut and Alton are both stars, so there was always going to be that interesting dynamic. How is that chemistry going to play out? Alton is a pro and he's danced with a lot of partners, and Adut has probably just danced at a disco and on a dance floor at a club. First she was a little nervous and then she really warmed up, and I think that was sort of really through Alton's confidence, making her feel comfortable and creating that environment for her.
Adut tied in so beautifully with the story of our founder, Bernie. You know, that was the story of a refugee with big plans and big visions.
I grew up in a refugee camp in Kenya. My family fled war from South Sudan and landed in Kakuma. That's where I spent the first 8 years of my life before I moved to Australia. Grew up very, very far from fashion. We didn't know what a magazine was, and only discovered the love that I have for fashion when I moved to Australia.
Adut, to me, really epitomises the modern Australian young woman. She's lived an incredible life, and now she's sort of taking on the international stage. She's really such a muse for Vogue.
It's an extraordinary achievement for such a young woman. She is driven by the right things. She's driven purely by trying to help her family.
I finished my school 2 years ago, bought my mum a car for her birthday last year. I just bought her a house for her birthday this year, and I made something out of myself. I worked hard, I followed my dreams, I proved a lot of people wrong, and I'm here today.
Seeing Alton and Adut together and just that chemistry between them, that really was the magic. It doesn't always happen, but with them it absolutely did. And that's just really special.
What was so remarkable about Australian Vogue? First of all, no Vogue had ever asked me to guest at it before. They were the first. And they were also the first that kind of acknowledged my efforts towards sustainability in the fashion space. So many stylists and so many magazines that I've worked with have seen doing things sustainably as a barrier. I cannot tell you how many stylists I've worked with, just like, you'll never be able to look chic that way. This is not going to make a difference. I have this very nice dress here, why won't you just put it on? I mean, it's been a real battle. So what's really exciting about the way that they embraced the challenge was that they saw it as a way to actually push the edges on things. We want this on the cover. We think this is worthy of a whole issue.
I realised how deeply committed she was to creating a really great magazine with really useful content and challenging us as a team to address some of the issues, not just around sustainability, but also around more diverse casting on our pages, around questioning why we'd always done things a certain way, why did we do this? She really wanted to get into the nuts and bolts as to what makes the magazine and what has made it today.
I travelled to Bangladesh and I saw the difference between an environment where you pay a proper premium for what you wear and an environment where you don't. And then the factory collapse happened in Rana Plaza, which was actually a factory that I physically went to. How did we completely lose our relationship and our connection to actually who physically made the clothes? How did it become all about which brand, but have nothing to do with the integrity of the item? That's a really big problem.
I think we need to find the balance where we're not exploiting different countries and workers to produce things that are too cheap. And I think what we need to educate our consumer and customer, the cheaper it is, is probably the worse off you are buying it, because you have to think about the cost of retail, the cost of transport, the cost of fuel, what it does to the environment, and what did the person get paid on the other end making it.
More than 80% of garment workers are women. So if you kind of aren't paying attention to what the conditions are like within the fashion industry, you are specifically, especially on the lower end of the chain, you're saying that you just don't really care about women and what they're paid for their work.
It was very important to me that our brand had very ethical, and I fought very hard to make it an ethical brand and was able to trace everything back. And it was such a hard slog, and what impresses me now about a lot of brands, it's not necessarily about proving that you are, it's just part of what you have to be.
It was pretty revolutionary that a lot of the stuff that we featured was me in vintage. To put vintage clothes in a fashion magazine, I think that was quite a big statement. Somehow this existing was like, no, this is happening.
I have many metrics for assessing the success of a magazine and of a specific issue. We look at circulation and sales, and we listen on social media, all of that. But my two most powerful metrics are A, which magazine gets stolen out of my office first and never comes back. And then a second one is if my wife or my children even ask me to bring an issue home. And both happened to the Emma Watson issue. It disappeared from my office 3 times.
The challenges and the compass that Emma set at that time was absolutely, true of where the world was going. And I feel like Emma very much directed us on that path.
I just felt so proud and just so grateful to the magazine and to Edwina for giving me the opportunity and letting me take up that much space. I just felt really touched. She would attribute that much change towards us working together. I'm really humbled by that. It's really lovely. Yeah.
We will soon enter a time, sooner than we think, I guess, where especially younger people look at every institution and at every major brand, at nation states, political parties, unions, and at these super brands in publishing and the fashion industry, and ask themselves, is this institution, this brand, part of the problem or part of the solution?
We love shooting outdoors because this is such an outdoor country. The fact that we use environments perhaps more than built spaces speaks to the nature of this country. Nothing really competes with our natural wonders. Gemma Ward is obviously part of our narrative at Vogue Australia. She went on to have so many Vogue covers globally, I don't think anybody could count. But part of her early story as a model was on our pages and on our covers, and she was there right until her retirement with modelling. So when she and her children and husband decided to move back to this deeply spiritual place in Byron Bay, you really got that she was connecting them back to Australia.
Wally, you're going to get a full page in the story. Shoot. Everyone give Wally a round of applause.
All right. Wally, bravo.
We love you, Wally.
It's been a very adventurous day. We've been climbing on a lot of rocks, exploring rainforests and waterfalls, and now the rain's come down. Everyone on the team is so hardworking and are such troopers. I think that says a lot about the Australian spirit as well. I feel like when I first shot with Vogue, it was the first time that I really felt like my career had been solidified and that I was legitimately working as a model in the industry and that I was being taken seriously. It was always one of my very first goals to be in Vogue, let alone on the cover. So having a relationship with Vogue for so long and having so many great memories that I've held dear, and remembering myself as a very young girl, how significant it was, I'm really, really proud of myself and our relationship that's been able to withstand. just been able to see the evolution of the magazine, and now having my children and my partner on set with me, it's fun to see how it's all linked up and come back around.
I feel very passionately, looking back at our history, that as storytellers we haven't told enough stories about our Indigenous Australians. Yes, we've had the wonderful Sam Harris and Elaine George on our covers. Yes, we have wonderful Charlie Fraser, who is consistently in our pages at the moment, and all proudly Indigenous women. However, there are so many deeper cultural stories that we can tell. Through the pages of the 60th, we've really made an effort to make sure that we're telling a lot of Indigenous Australian stories, because they are the stories that make us truly unique. With the Babbara women in Paris, with their unique journey over there, to be celebrated amongst the best of our fashion designers where they truly belong, was another unique opportunity.
I see the promotion and the understanding of Australian Indigenous culture as part of our broader reconciliation process. But what Australia brings are symbols and meanings encapsulated in the designs we're showing tonight in the Embassy that date back tens of thousands of years. And a member of the Babbara group of women can explain to us the meaning in a living way of those symbols that stretches back in an unbroken run for tens of thousands of years.
Contemporary Australia really values diversity and really wants to understand more about Indigenous Australia, particularly Indigenous art and design. I just applaud Vogue for taking this wonderful initiative.
The opportunity to celebrate Bangara's 30th anniversary at the same time as we're celebrating our 60th anniversary presented this wonderful opportunity to do a shoot to celebrate their extraordinary talent and unique way of telling stories through dance. We are doing this in a really highly engaged and proactive manner, looking for these wonderful stories to tell regularly to all readers. I hope that this issue will set us on a natural path where it's just part of our everyday content and language and storytelling, and I hope that this is just setting us on a course that just becomes part of who we are for the next 60 years.
I like to think that our belief in quality, our belief in creativity, our belief in talent, our belief in being the best will always remain. I think it's even more important to be very focused on who you are and what you stand for, and embracing change, because we are an industry that celebrates change, and Vogue obviously needs to be reflecting that change and being ahead of that change.
I can't say that Vogue will always be on paper. However, it's expressed on film or in a book, or it's piped into your mind. The very notion of it means to communicate about culture. That's never going to change no matter what form it ends up being expressed in.
And that's why Vogue matters. Vogue's storytelling and investment in beautiful imagery documents what matters to Australian women. A Vogue cover immediately places you in the decade it was shot. Future generations will look back at our 60th anniversary issue and recognise this moment in time.